Hello everybody, welcome to Unit 4, which is the integumentary system, also known as skin. As I have mentioned previously, all the objectives are given to you guys so that you have them for when you go through your lectures and you know what you need to know by the end of every single lecture. There are quite a few pages of these, so just read through them carefully. So let's start off with the components of the integumentary system. So the integumentary system consists of your skin, your hair, your nails, and all the associated glands, like your sweat glands that are found within your skin. Skin is your largest and heaviest organ. Yes, it is an organ. It covers an area of 1.5 to 2 square meters, and it accounts for about 15% of your body weight. It also consists of two layers. You have the epidermis, which consists of stratified squamous epithelium, and then you have the dermis, which is a deeper connective tissue layer. Together with this, we do discuss the hypodermis. It's technically not a part of skin, but it is discussed with it as it lies directly underneath. So here is just an image out of the textbook where you can see the different layers. So we have the epidermis at the top here, and then we have the dermis at the bottom, or the middle layer, and then we have the hypodermis, which is technically not part of your skin, but we do discuss it together. What are the functions of your integumentary system? It provides resistance to trauma and infection. It's your body's very first defense against any outside enemies that are trying to get into the body. It also performs other barrier functions, like it keeps water at bay, and it also protects us from UV rays. It's responsible for vitamin D synthesis, sensation, so touching things, and also thermoregulation, so controlling the body temperature. The epidermis is a keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. The cells of the epidermis are stem cells. So here we have a stem cell. Then we have keratinocytes. You have living keratinocytes, and then you also have dead keratinocytes. You also have melanocytes, which is here in the center. You have tactile cells, which are responsible for your touch, and then dendritic cells, which relay the touch signals to your brain to know what you are touching. There are several layers to your epidermis. These are discussed from deep to superficial, which is also from young to old. So we're working from within the body towards the surface of the skin. So the first layer is your stratum basale over here. So that's going to be your base layer, and this is where all the new skin cells are formed. Next, we have your stratum spinosum, which is the largest layer of the epidermis. Then we have the stratum granulosum, the stratum lucidum, and lastly the stratum corneum. And this is where dead skin cells are then shed. So your stratum corneum is specifically very thick on your palms of your hands and your feet. This is for protection. Keratinization. Dead cells are constantly lost and they must continuously be replaced. Wherever you go, you are constantly shedding skin cells. You are leaving a trail of skin cells behind in every single place that you have been. Keratinocytes are produced by mitosis of stem cells. So remember from the cellular lecture where we said stem cells can develop into several different cells. One of these is keratinocytes. New keratinocytes push older ones toward the surface. This usually takes 30 to 40 days from when the cells are formed until they reach the surface. They are shoved upwards by the dividing cells below, and because of this, they are flattened and they produce more keratin filaments, And they also produce lipid-filled membrane coating vesicles. Here you can see them on this image. There are four important processes that occur in the stratum granulosum, and all of these work together to form the epidermal water barrier. So the first one is keratohyalin granules that release filaggrin, and this binds the cytoskeletal keratin filaments together into tough bundles. The cells produce a tough layer of envelope proteins. These are nearly indestructible protein sacs around these keratin bundles formed in the first process. Then membrane coating vesicles release a lipid mixture which is waterproof, and then keratinocytes are cut off from the supply of nutrients from below, and it forms a tough waterproof sac enclosing coarse bundles of keratin. As mentioned, these processes all result in the epidermal water barrier, and it's very important to the retention of body water to make sure we don't lose water through our skin. Now we will look at the dermis. So we looked at the epidermis. We're moving on to the dermis. The dermis is composed mainly of collagen, but it also contains elastic fibers, reticular fibers, fibroblasts, and other cells. Hair follicles and nail roots are usually embedded in the dermis, and in the face, your skeletal muscles actually attach to the dermal collagen fibers to produce expressions. The boundary between the epidermis and the dermis is usually wavy. The dermal papilla are upward waves of finger-like extensions of the dermis. So here at the bottom, you can see the dermal papilla. But then you have epidermal ridges, so downward epidermal waves between the papilla. So here you can see your epidermal waves. So here's your dermis and here's your epidermis, and they connect through this wave-like structure. The dermal and epidermal boundaries interlocked like corrugated cardboard, and they resist slippage of the dermis across the epidermis across the dermis. So this structure prevents the two layers from just sliding across one another. Your dermis consists of two zones. You have a papillary layer. This is a thin zone of areolar tissue. And then you have a reticular layer, which is a thick zone of dense irregular connective tissue. So last week, Ms. Naidu would have done the areolar tissue and dense irregular connective tissue with you guys, and this is where this comes into play within the dermis of the skin. The dermis also contain extensive plexuses of blood vessels at three locations. So first between your dermis and your epidermis. Then in the middle of your dermis, you also have quite a lot of blood vessels. And then between the dermis and the hypodermis, you also have the network of blood vessels. So between each of the junctions, as well as in the dermis itself. The hypodermis, remember, not technically a part of skin, but we do discuss them together. The hypodermis has an indistinct boundary between the dermis and the hypodermis. It's very difficult to actually tell the two apart. The hypodermis generally has more areolar and adipose tissue, so fat tissue. The functions of the hypodermis: it pads the body, and it also binds the skin to the underlying tissues. So your hypodermis is responsible for binding your skin to the muscles below. An interesting fact: drugs are introduced into the hypodermis by injection because the subcutaneous tissue is highly vascular and absorbs them very quickly. So that is why we inject medication into the hypodermis layer of the skin. The subcutaneous fat in the hypodermis is composed predominantly of adipose tissue, and this serves as an energy reservoir and thermal insulation of the body. In this image, you can see the epidermis, the dermis, and then you can see the subcutaneous fat of the hypodermis. This just provides a summary of the different layers as well as the layers within each layer. And this is just a nice summary for you guys to use when you are studying. That is why I included it for you. So this is just a great tool for you guys to use. Next, we're going to talk about melanin. Melanin plays a significant role in your skin color. Melanin is a substance that is produced by melanocytes. So remember, in the very first image, roughly in the center of that image, we had a melanocyte. The melanocyte accumulates, or melanin accumulates in keratinocytes. So the stratum basale and the stratum spinosum. So you have melanin that is released by melanocytes, and you find them in the stratum basale and the stratum spinosum. There are two types of melanin. You have eumelanin, which is a brownish black color, but then you also have pheomelanin, which is a reddish yellow sulfur containing pigment. And these are responsible for creating the different tones of skin, like skin tones. Different skin colors have essentially the same number of melanocytes. So we all have about the same number of melanocytes. But in dark skin, the melanocytes produce a lot more melanin than in lighter skin. The melanin granules are more spread out rather than tightly clumped together. The melanin breaks down very slowly, and melanized cells are seen throughout the epidermis. Whereas in light skin, the melanin is more clumped together near the keratinocyte nucleus, and therefore it imparts less color to the cells around it. It also breaks down faster, and little of it is seen beyond the stratum basale. Skin color also varies with exposure to the UV rays of sunlight. This stimulates melanin synthesis and it darkens the skin. But a suntan, it fades because the melanin is degraded in the older keratinocytes. So as the keratinocytes age, where they move to the surface, the melanin starts to break down, and therefore you start to lose your tan. The keratinocytes that reach the surface that are still have this tan color, they are eventually just shed, and therefore you easily lose a tan. The amount of melanin also varies from place to place on the body. For example, melanin is very concentrated in freckles and moles and less concentrated in the skin around it. Other factors that affect your skin color: first of all, you have hemoglobin, which provides a red pigment, and it imparts reddish to pinkish hues as the blood vessels show through the skin. An example of this is your lips, because the blood capillaries are a lot closer to the surface and are therefore more visible. We also have keratin, which provides a yellow pigment. It's acquired from egg yolks and yellow and orange vegetables. Depending on the diet, keratin can become concentrated in the stratum corneum and subcutaneous fat, which imparts a yellow color. This is easily seen on the hands and feet because your stratum corneum is the thickest. This has actually happened to me personally when I was taking too much vitamin A. My hands turned orange, and I had to wait 3 weeks for the skin to be shed until I could return to a normal color. The next component of the integumentary system is hair. So hair is also known as a pilus. It's a slender filament of keratinized cells that grow from an oblique tube in the skin called a hair follicle. So the tube within the skin is called a hair follicle. The structure, the portion of the hair above the skin, is called the shaft, and anything beneath the skin is called the root. The root deeply penetrates into the dermis, so here you have your dermis layer, or the hypodermis. It can even extend further, and it ends with a dilation called a bulb. The only living cells of hair are in and near the bulb, which means roughly only that part of an actual hair is living. The rest is dead. All the hair on your body is technically dead. Hair has 3 different layers. We're going to discuss them from inside to outside. So in the middle, we have a medulla, which is a core of loosely arranged cells. And as you can see, there are a few air spaces in between. Next, we have the cortex, which is this area over here. This forms the bulk of the hair, and it consists of several layers of elongated keratinized cells. They appear cuboidal to flattened in cross sections. Lastly, we have the cuticle, which is the outermost layer of hair, and it's composed of multiple layers of very thin, scaly cells that overlap each other like roof shingles. If you think about a roof, the way that all the roof tiles overlap, this is how your hair cuticle also looks. Then hair follicles. As I mentioned, your hair follicle is a diagonal tube that contains the hair root. There are 2 principal layers in a hair follicle. You have the epithelial root sheath, which consists of stratified squamous epithelium, but then you also have the connective tissue root sheath, which contains collagenous connective tissue and is derived from the dermis. Nerve fibers called hair receptors entwine each follicle and respond to hair movements. So here you can see your nerve fiber that surrounds the hair follicle, and when the hair is moved on the external surface of the body, it sends a signal to your brain telling you that it's moving. This gets us to goosebumps. Every hair has a pilar erector muscle. If you look at the previous slide, you can clearly see the muscle on the image. It's a bundle of smooth muscle cells and extends from the dermal collagen fibers to the connective tissue root sheath. The pilar erector muscle contracts, and this pulls the follicles into a vertical position and makes the hair stand on end. This happens in cold weather, when you are scared, when something touches you weirdly, or any other stimuli. And this actually serves absolutely no purpose. There is no purpose for goosebumps. Then we're going to talk about hair growth. So the site of hair growth is the bulb. As I mentioned, the only living cells is found within the bulb of the hair follicle, and therefore it's the only site of hair growth. There are 3 stages to a hair growth cycle. These are called anagen, catagen, and telogen. And these are actually genetically controlled. So every person's cycle length differs. And this would determine the length that your hair can grow to. For instance, in this lovely lady over here, she has a very long growth cycle, which means her hair maybe takes 2 years to go through the anagen phase, then 2 years through the catagen phase, and then 2 years through the telogen phase before it stops growing. Some of us, we might have a 1-year cycle or a 6-month cycle, and therefore our hair the hair length is genetically determined. Next, we're going to talk about nails. These are clear, hard derivatives of the stratum corneum, so the outermost layer of skin. It's composed of densely packed, very thin, dead, scaly cells, and they are filled with parallel fibers of hard keratin. Now, there are several parts to a nail. We're going to start with the nail plate, which includes the free edge of your nail. Next, we have the nail body, which forms the majority of your nail. Then we have the nail root, which you can see over here. That's the part of the nail that extends underneath the flap of skin. That flap of skin is called your nail fold. And then we have a nail bed, which is the surface on which the nail grows. You also have a nail matrix, which is the part of the nail that extends under the nail fold. Then you also have a lunule, this white area on your nail, and it's called lunule because it looks like a half moon. And then you also have your cuticle, which is the very little end of flap of skin of your nail fold. For nail growth, the nail growth occurs in the matrix. So remember the little part of the nail that extends underneath the skin. This is done through mitosis, which enhances the growth of a nail. A regular human grows about 1 millimeter of nails per week. And then your lunule is the matrix thickness obscures the underlying dermal blood vessels. So that half moon on your nail, that's where your nail is at its thickest because it's newly formed nail. And because of that, you can't see the blood vessels underneath, which is making it look whiter in appearance. Next, we're going to talk about skin glands. This is an important site of excretion, and you have several different types of cutaneous glands. First, you have sudoriferous glands. These secrete sweat. Then you have sebaceous glands, which secrete sebum. You have ceruminous glands, which secrete cerumen, which is a fancy word for earwax. And then you have your mammary glands, which secrete milk. This table on the side is quite nice for you as a summary. Then we have sebaceous glands. These produce an oily secretion called sebum. They are flask-shaped with short ducts that usually open into a hair follicle. So here we have our sebaceous glands, and they have ducts that open up into the hair follicle, and therefore it's secreted with your hair. Sebum keeps the skin and the hair from becoming dry, brittle, and cracked. You get people with overactive sebaceous glands, and this usually leads to oily skin or oily hair. Then your sweat glands, you have different types of sweat glands. First, you have apocrine sweat glands, which is this guy over here. These are located in the groin, the anal region, axilla, areola, as well as the beard area in mature males. The function is basically as a scent gland, and this is where body odor comes in. So fresh sweat doesn't actually have a bad odor. Fresh sweat does not smell. But when sweat is degraded by bacteria, it causes body odor. And the fancy name for that is bromhidrosis. Then we have murocrine or ecrine sweat glands. These are usually found in the palms of your hands, soles of your feet, and the forehead. Their primary function is for cooling the body, and the structure is a simple tubular gland which is twisted and coiled within the dermis, or it can be in the hypodermis, and this duct leads to a sweat pore. The duct is lined with stratified cuboidal epithelium when it's in the dermis, and it is lined with keratinocytes when it is in the epidermis. The skin suffers the most physical injuries, but it resists and recovers better than any other organ. Your epidermal cells contain tough protein called keratin, and this is linked by very strong desmosomes, which provides durability. Very few infectious organisms can actually penetrate intact skin. Bacteria and fungi usually live on the surface of the skin, and then when you have a cut or a wound, this bacteria can enter the actual body and then cause an infection. The amount of bacteria and fungi on the surface of the body or the skin is controlled by the dryness, the acidity of your skin. We have defensive antimicrobial peptides or proteins like dermcidin and defensins. And then we have protective acidic film called the acidic or acid mantle. And these all control the amount of bacteria and fungi that live on the surface of your skin. Then we get to different sensations. So the skin is the most extensive sense organ. You have a variety of nerve endings that all react to different stimulants such as heat, cold, touch, texture, pressure, vibration, as well as injury. The specific nerve endings will be discussed when we do the census lecture, which is right after nervous system. So I think it's unit 10. where we do senses, and then we'll discuss the actual nerves that are responsible for these senses. You have a lot more nerve endings on different parts of your body. So the face, the palms of your hands, your fingers, the soles of your feet, your nipples, and your genitals all have a lot more nerve endings, making them a lot more sensitive. But then you also have a lot less nerve endings on the back as well as overlying skin that overlies joints. So your elbows and your knees. If you think about it, if you pinch your elbow, it doesn't really hurt that much. But if you pinch your face, it's going to hurt. So that is because of the distribution of nerve endings throughout the skin. Then we have vitamin D synthesis. So the skin performs the very first step of synthesis of vitamin D within the body. This vitamin D is needed for bone development and maintenance, and the process is completed in the liver and the kidneys. We will discuss vitamin D synthesis in more detail in a skeletal lecture. Then we have thermoregulation. So skin is richly supplied with nerve endings, and some of these are thermoreceptors. So they monitor the body surface temperature. When it is cold, your body retains heat by constricting the blood vessels of the dermis, and this is called cutaneous vasoconstriction. And this keeps the warm blood deeper in the body. So if you think about it, your hands and your feet are the very first thing to get cold. This is because the blood vessels constrict and your body redirects the warm blood to your organs to keep them warm because they are the most important. When it comes to hot weather, we lose heat by dilating the vessels. So exactly the opposite of cold. So cold constricts the blood vessels and heat dilates the blood vessels. And this is called cutaneous vasodilation. This allows more blood to flow closer to the surface of the skin, and then you lose heat through the skin. If you think about it, that's why you become very red in your face when you exercise. If this redness or vasodilation is not sufficient in cooling down the body, that's when sweat glands start to secrete perspiration. And the evaporation of sweat has a very powerful cooling effect on the body. Skin can actually be used for diagnostics for different diseases as well. This is a very nice question to ask. I'm just putting that out there. So skin may exhibit abnormal colors, for example, cyanosis, which is a blue discoloration. You can see it in this first image. And this is caused by an oxygen deficiency. Then we have erythema, which is abnormal redness. This can happen in exercise, hot weather, when you have a sunburn, when you get angry or embarrassed, and even some diseases have erythema as a symptom, such as lupus. Then we have pallor, which is a fancy way of saying paleness or being ashen in color. And this is when there's too little blood flow to the skin. And it's usually caused by low blood pressure, cold temperatures, or severe anemia. So this is quite interesting. Then we're going to talk about skin cancer. It's one of the most common cancers, but it is also the easiest cancer to treat. And there are very high survival rates. Most common cause of skin cancer is UV radiation from the sun. This is because the radiation damages your DNA and that disables tumor suppressor genes, which causes the skin to form tumors. The location is usually related to the amount of UV exposure, and therefore they are mostly found on the head, neck, and hands of individuals. There are 3 different types of skin cancer. So we have a basal cell carcinoma, and this is the least deadly because it doesn't metastasize. So metastasize means when you have cancer in one part of your body and it is then spread through your lymph nodes or through the blood to a different part of your body. For instance, breast cancer that becomes pancreas cancer. So the same thing can happen with skin cancer. But your basal cell carcinoma does not metastasize. and therefore it's not deadly. If you do avoid going to the doctor for a basal cell carcinoma, though, it can really disfigure your face because it starts to eat away at the cells around it. Then we have squamous cell carcinoma. There is a very good chance of recovery if you detect it quite early. If you do not go to the doctor, it does metastasize to your lymph nodes, and this can make it lethal. Then we have melanoma, this bottom one over here. This is extremely aggressive skin cancer. It can be treated surgically if caught early, so they can cut it out. But if it does metastasize, it is unresponsive to chemotherapy, which means as soon as that melanoma metastasizes to a different organ, you are done for. Therefore, patients have a very bad prognosis for metastatic melanoma. It's usually around a 5% survival rate, and the average patient only lives for about 6 months after the metastases has occurred. Then we're going to talk about burns. So you get different degrees of burns. So it's quite easy to remember. First degree burns only involve the epidermis, so only the topmost layer. So one layer, first degree burns. Then we have second degree burns, which has 2 layers of the skin. So your epidermis and your dermis, that results in a second degree burn. When a burn goes through the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis and deeper tissues, these are referred to as a third degree burn. So first degree, 1 layer, second degree, 2 layers, third degree, 3 or more layers. These are caused by fires, kitchen spills, bath water that is too hot, severe sunburn, radiation, acids, and even electrical shock. For treating burns, first degree burns, they usually heal in a few days and they don't really leave scars. For example, a regular sunburn. Then you have second degree burns. These usually heal in 2 weeks to several months. They can leave scars, and the epidermis regenerates by division of epithelial cells. This is like severe sunburns or when you burn yourself with your iron. I personally have had several second degree burns in my life due to my very light skin color. Even with SPF 50, if I'm in the sun for more than an hour, I will probably get blisters. But then you get third degree burns and nothing is left. There is no skin left in that area. And therefore, it can only regenerate from the edges. So it can only try to heal itself from the outside of the wound. This often requires skin grafts, where they take skin from other parts of the body and then implant it on the part that has no skin. And if it's left to heal by itself, so if you were to leave this burn to heal by itself, because it only heals from the edges, it will start to contract and pull the skin inwards. And this can result in disfigurement of your hand or your face or wherever the burn occurred. And that is it, guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to WhatsApp me. I'll respond to you as fast as I can.